Please welcome Eric, John, and Dale to the S4 main stage.
Well, welcome back. We have had some exciting times today, and these guys did all the hard work. They've been upstairs on the 3rd floor working the ICS Detection Challenge. So I do appreciate, and I know they're going to recognize other people, but they've done a lot of work to make this happen. And also I appreciate the vendors, Claroty, Gravwell, Nozomi Networks, and Security Matters for stepping up to the challenge, because putting your technology on the line is really a big deal. So today we've had the asset identification phase of the challenge, and I'm going to let John and Eric cover most of it, and I'm just going to ask some questions. So please, guys, go ahead.
Okay, so basically today what we're going to talk about in the next little while is what the challenge was, why we were doing it, and who was involved. We'll talk a little bit about where we got the traffic samples and how we sanitized them. And then John and I are also going to talk about the reason why we're all here, what the results were.
Mm-hmm. So before we get into that, we want to talk about why did Eric and I basically step up to Dale's challenge to help out with this. For myself, me and my team, we perform cybersecurity vulnerability and risk assessments on a daily basis all over the country. And one of the key things that we always tell our clients is that if you don't understand your assets and know how they're connected, you can't secure it. So getting a good asset inventory and good network diagrams is really step one in any kind of assessment program. And of course, that's all backed up by standards like the NIST framework and ISA that also say that's the building block of any program. So as I say, we're out doing this all the time and building asset inventory matrices and diagrams for our clients, and we're always looking for tools that will help us do the job. And we use a lot of different tools in our practice. So selfishly, one thing I wanted to see was how do these tools stack up, particularly in this environment where they are not connected to a live system, but they are consuming PCAPs that were captured offline, because that's in a passive assessment, that's typically what we're working with. So that was one motivation for me, and then the other is we constantly have clients of ours coming to us and asking us about these tools and their capabilities and which one can do this and that and so on. So we can't test all of these tools independently. So this was an opportunity for us to see a variety of tools in a side-by-side type of comparison that you wouldn't normally get to do in the real world.
Yeah, one of the reasons I was really interested, because of Tofino, I learned a lot about deep packet inspection and this space, and then I saw a lot of people offering deep packet inspection, and I realized that just because it says DPI on the label doesn't mean it does it inside. There's a big difference in between DPI capabilities. So I was really curious to see, sort of to paraphrase what Dale said last year, how deep is your DPI and what are you really capable of doing? So I'm very curious, and it's been really interesting to see the capabilities over the last day.
So as you may have read, this challenge is broken up into 2 phases or 2 days. So today, phase 1 or day 1, the challenge to the competitors was really all about asset identification. So we provided them with PCAPs that were captured from real ICS installations, but highly anonymized to remove any trace of anything that would identify the source. The objective then for the vendors was to be able to identify as many assets as they could, and basically as many details about those assets as possible. And you'll see the scoring sheet in a moment. They were also asked to provide us with whatever kind of topology diagram that their tool is able to automatically generate. We did not score them on that. It's too subjective, but you will get to see the diagrams that they produced. And then the scoring was primarily based on the completeness of the data they provided, the correctness of it, and the timeliness. We gave the challengers basically about an hour to an hour and a half to process the PCAPs after they received them, and they basically got bonus points for submitting the materials to us earlier and then they would lose points the longer it took them to do it. So a little bit of a way of measuring how quickly they could produce the results, because we're really trying to measure the capability of the tools, not the team. So that's why that. And then I guess they also were provided extra credit for anything unique, above and beyond what our scoring template asked for, because we tried to include everything that we believe that most of the vendors have claim capabilities for, but there's always stuff that we don't know about, so that's what the extra credit was for.
So day 2, we're going to take the PCAPs that we ran today, and we're going to modify them, add in some malicious traffic, and we're going to score tomorrow on how well people can identify, not tomorrow, Thursday, how well they can identify those attacks that we've injected into the traffic mix. And it'll be, again, your scoring is going to be based on how fast you can identify it and how accurate you are. Again, I'd like to call out the contestants. This was really, I'd have to say, brave of Claroty, Security Matters, Nozomi, and Gravwell, because we really didn't give them a lot of idea what they were going to get into. And so I really want to give a hand to those guys. They were really amazing and really brave to do this. Next slide.
Yeah.
And I want to mention that this is harder than the real world. These are real PCAPs from real facilities, but it is a very limited time sample. They don't get to sit there for days. They got to sit there for an hour and pick up PCAPs. So perhaps they would have got a lot more data after 24 hours. The other thing that makes it very hard for them is we don't give them any context. You know, we tell them what we're going to tell you, and that's it. And then lastly, we only fed them, really this is 15 samples from 15 different locations, but in effect, this looks to them like one sensor. So they don't have any physical attributes, you know, location attributes they can assign to this. That makes it hard. So this is harder than the real world.
When you say one sensor, you mean that it was one sensor moved around to the different sites, so you weren't getting the same time period of data from multiple sites?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. And in real world, you'd get 15 sensors all simultaneously. You can do correlation across them.
But it was as if we went to 15 sites in series.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so who is the supplier? Well, it's a company called the Palm Desert Oil Company. It's got a gas pipeline, gas plant, terminals in Riverside County, and they're bringing product from the newly discovered fields in the middle of the golf courses of Palm Springs. So that's the story. That's where we got it, and we're not going to say any more than that. Next slide. But really, it's captured from 15 locations. It's a oil and gas midstream company. We have PCAPs from their control centers, from multiple stations, and from their terminals. We basically pack that into a 1-hour mega monster PCAP with about 15 million packets, 800 unique IP addresses, all on one monster consolidated stream. And these PCAPs included traffic from SCADA systems, PLCs, a major SCADA system, a PLC, from lots of protocol converters, lots of serial to Ethernet converters, some VFDs, some flow computers. So like any real operation, a lot of different gear. Now, I think one of the things that really amazed us was the complexity of sanitizing this. It's more than just changing the IPs. When we started, that was sort of where we started. Oh yeah, we'll go in and we'll use TCP rewrite or something like that, and we'll quickly change the IP addresses and done with it. But IP addresses are not just in IP headers. They're buried in just about every protocol out there, and they're not always in the same format and the same strings. They get reversed. You know, you'll find them in your DCOM and OPC and bindings. You'll find them embedded in your SIP traffic. You'll find them embedded all over the place. So as soon as you want to change IP addresses, it gets really interesting. You got to look at a lot of different formats and a lot of different protocols. And the secret stuff, like the company name, isn't just found in plain ASCII strings. You get tons and tons of different formatting that you've got to hunt through. Some of it really obscure. And again, we wanted to find all that. And there's a lot to find. In those PCAPs, that 15 million PCAPs, we found over 1,000 identifiable strings and tag names. We ended up with 40,000 rule permutations to try and clean up the whole works, over 15 million packets. So we jokingly said this is a great way to keep your house warm in Canada. I need to mention one other thing, yeah. All of this is due to the efforts of Ron Brash, who will be talking about the challenges of good sanitization on Wednesday, tomorrow at 12:30. Right. Without Ron, this wouldn't have happened.
And that sanitization might be of interest to anyone that's talking about sending data to an ISAC or third party for community collaboration and that sort of thing, to understand what was done and some of the places it hid that we weren't thinking.
Oh yeah, I mean we found, we were forever amazed. We'd think we'd have it clean and then we'd have to do it again and do it again. Sanitization is not easy, it's a science.
Okay.
All right, so we're ready to give you some of the results. So some of the challenges, so we put together a scorecard. There was a team of judges, if you will. We put together a scorecard. There were some challenges in scoring in terms of trying to universally have the vendors describe to us what is a manufacturer, for example. Certainly with a MAC address, you can look up the manufacturer of the chipset, and that will certainly can send you in the right direction for a lot of devices, but it also can obscure the actual true manufacturer of the product. And then a lot of times, for us to distinguish as scorekeepers between what was a guess and what was a confident assertion, we had to make some judgment calls, but really we did our best to try to make this as objective as possible. And so what helped with that is there's an awful lot of data, right? There was over 800 possible devices to find in these PCAPs. So we weren't dealing with just 10 items. We were dealing with a large data set. So before we get into the technical details, we did ask the vendors, as we said, to provide us with some kind of visualization. This was not a test of their HMI or their GUI. It was more of a test of the capabilities of the product. So we're really just going to show you these graphs. In this case, you may actually want to talk to the vendors to get more of an understanding about what these diagrams are attempting to show. But you can see, obviously, it was a large set of data. And different approaches to diagramming. Some more of a scatter diagram. Some appear to put some effort into trying to follow some kind of a hierarchy, whether that be the Purdue model, is what it appears. And different variations of how you can zoom in or zoom out on the data and drill down to some of them allow you to drill down to a specific device and see the attributes for that device. Actually, I think all the products have that capability.
I was a bit surprised when I saw this because, and to be fair, this was a difficult request because the products very likely have more capabilities than we're seeing here, but the task was you submit something, you get the points, regardless of how good or bad it is. But they were allowed to, each of the vendors was allowed to submit up to three pages. And I expected more, I guess. I expected, and maybe it's just they didn't give us the drill downs that would look good. You know, you're starting to see, like, I think in the Nozomi example, they gave more drill downs and it was a little more useful than just showing all the traffic patterns. Like something like that was more what I was expecting. But again, that could have been as much of the way we set up the challenge and maybe didn't explain it fully.
We didn't emphasize the diagrams as much.
But it might be something, if you're at the Cabana sessions tomorrow, you might want to stop by their booths and say, hey, look, you got this data, show us how you could drill down further into these charts and what could we actually see, because I don't think this is if this is the best, then we still have a ways to go in the product category, but my guess is we're not seeing the best.
No, I think because of the time restrictions, both the vendors didn't have much time and nor did we have time to evaluate them, so we really stuck more to the facts than subjective things like the diagrams.
Right.
I would definitely change my request next year on what got submitted, a little more detail. I want overview, I want zoomed in, and get a lot more specific.
Right. Yep.
There's been some learning curves on this.
Yes.
We tried to pull out some of the differentiators we saw. So again, there was kind of a baseline of what we expected the vendors to be able to find, and then we did try to call out, and we did have a small number of points available for basically extra credit for some of the differentiators. So Nozomi scored well in this category. They were able to better differentiate the vendors, the product suppliers in the PCAPs. Every vendor could identify by MAC address, could look up the vendor. Nozomi seemed to take that a bit further in being able to actually deduce who the true supplier was.
Yeah, I think that was really important. That was quite impressive. That it just wasn't an Intel. Intel wasn't the vendor just because there was an Intel card in it. They were able to determine much more information about what that box was actually sitting there for.
Right. Nozomi was also able to identify the SCADA vendor. The others may have as well, but they didn't. It wasn't obvious in the results.
Yeah.
So the Nozomi not only identified the supplier, but specifically called out the SCADA supplier. And also they were able to discover Modbus RTU and the Telvent protocols.
And how, in one sense that's big because that's the largest, probably most important system, the pipeline SCADA with Telvent Oasis, probably Oasis DNA or something like that. But on the other hand, if you were to visit a customer, he would probably tell you, I have Telvent Oasis DNA.
Of course they know that.
They wouldn't forget that one.
Yeah.
But how specific did they get in terms of identifying the various components? Were they able to identify the main server, the historian, the data pumps? I mean, what were they able to identify?
If I recall, servers and HMIs were called out.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was anything more granular than that.
Yeah, but I think they got the differences between a client and a server, and I think that was quite
They
impressive.
actually use names like XOS station and things like that, or just like a generic HMI?
If it was available in the tag, so the tags were sanitized, but little things like OS, which is a very generic tag, that was still left in.
Okay.
Why don't you do this one?
Yeah, okay, sure. So at this point, we were looking for this is an asset discovery day, but people were also reporting on interesting things they were finding in the non-tampered with data set. Nozomi found CVs on Rockwell and Cisco, found something they called a SYN flood, which we have to investigate because this is the live traffic. So quite impressive. Security Matters also found CVEs on different products, though, on Windows and Rockwell products. Claroty and Security Matters and Nozomi all found telnet passwords or HTTP passwords, which is interesting, which I'll speak to in a moment. But good work intercepting those, pointing them out. In plain text, by the way. And Claroty also intercepted a program download and broke it all out so we could see it. So that was all pretty interesting stuff to get as results.
Oh, that is an interesting one. So what was being downloaded to? What was the end device? Do we remember?
It was an engineering station to a PLC.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So
that
new
must have
logic or
occurred
something?
during the capture, and they discovered that.
Yeah. So that was quite interesting. And they broke it out, like, it wasn't just a download is happening. They actually broke out what that download was so we could look at it.
Provided details.
So if in theory they could, maybe with more time, they could identify what was happening on that PLC, what that PLC was controlling in the way of a process?
I think it's more change detection.
Yeah.
Just change?
That would have been my guess.
Okay.
That's what the report indicated, that there was a change, that somebody had downloaded a program.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is the summary scorecard. So you can see here that we scored them on the ability to identify the asset name, the tag name of the device, if it was in the PCAP. The device type, characterize the device type by whether it was a PLC, an HMI, a protocol converter, so on. Obviously the IP address, the MAC address, the manufacturer, model, serial number, the OS or the hardware version, or the version, the hardware version, if that was available. I can't read that.
So there was
50.
a time bonus there, and then the bonus was just if they saw something new. Is that what the bonus category is?
Yeah, the bonus category was for things like Nozomi finding the telnet stuff and nobody else,
Okay.
or people finding passwords, stuff that wasn't the basic stuff, that they were going above and beyond.
Oh, that's interesting. So if we look at that, just so I can make sure I can see it all here. So you have some, when you look at the individual categories, you have some differences, like, looks like Claroty and Security Matters scored a lot higher on device type.
Yeah,
than
that's
the other two.
good question. Yeah, I'm going to
Is
comment
that-
on that.
I mean, some of these, as we talked about it in the, and I just had a little bit of time, some of this is the scoring methodology.
Certainly.
Being the first time we did this. So, you shouldn't take any of these as gospel, but what was the difference there? Why did they score higher? Were they just identifying more? Is that the
More
key?
and more accurate.
Oh, wait a second. I was going to say the other way around. I was going to say the thing about Nozomi, who identified less devices, but damn, they were accurate about them.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
Okay. I agree with
versus
that.
the other guys with device types, for example, were far less accurate and far less precise, but they identified more. So you got this sort of balance between fewer but super accurate versus more but like PLC. Oh,
Okay, so let me just press you on the word there. Do you mean they were more detailed or more accurate?
Nozomi was more detailed and more accurate. There was more information in their device types, and if they weren't sure of it, they didn't put an entry in.
I see.
Whereas everybody else was kind of, it looked more like some of them were intelligent guesses,
Okay.
So unfortunately, we couldn't change the scoring model midstream. Otherwise, I will next time. You'll get points off for guessing, but we didn't have that built in.
And I think we should note here, just for Corey and the folks at Gravwell, I don't think they expected to do very well in this part
Right.
of the competition. They're here more for the phase 2 because they haven't really, theirs is a generic model without the whole, emphasis on understanding ICS protocols and ICS devices. So
Yeah.
it'll be interesting to see how they do on the detection side. Because my guess is they were mainly getting things like IP addresses, MAC addresses, the basic things you'd see on any type of network. Were they able to identify PLCs, RTUs?
Yeah, they did. I mean, one of the things that was impressive is that pretty well everybody was able to properly identify Rockwell product.
Right.
And not just that it's a Rockwell device, but actually finding the serial numbers and the makes and the models and stuff like that, and getting Rockwell transmit a lot of information over the network. And so people were able to really tear that apart well. Some of the companies did really well also doing the same with Cisco. But not everybody, which surprised me. I thought everybody would have tons of detail on the Cisco from the CDP, CDT?
Yep.
Yeah, protocols. So it was one of the things that I took away too is that every company sort of has their protocols of preference that they've really torn apart, but nobody's done them all.
Mm-hmm. And then, I don't know, do you have a lot more slides? I don't want to jump ahead.
No, I think we're
Two
we have
more,
one
I
or
think.
two more.
Okay,
wrap-up
why don't we
slides.
finish up, then I wanted to get into a couple areas.
Really, just one wrap-up slide about some of our takeaways. If, like Eric said, if we were to do this again, the scoring, we did our best with scoring and weighting, but certainly there's some subjectivity to that.
Can I add something to that
Sure,
one too?
yeah.
We couldn't even agree with the judges as we were all standing up there on what the definition of an asset was. You know, do you define it by the card that's sitting in it? Do you define it by the, you know, is that by the manufacturer of the computer? Do you define it by the software that's running on it? Do you define it by the function? You know, so take something like a data historian. Is that the asset, or is it the fact that it's, you know, a Dell computer? Or is it the fact that it's got a Intel NIC on it, or is it the fact that it's running Pi software? We couldn't even decide. You know, there's so many definitions of what or how you define this is such and such a type of asset. That was a challenge, because we just gave them one spot to say what this is. I would do that differently next time.
Yep, so it was easy. It really varied a little bit. We left it up to the vendors to define an asset, and maybe we should not have that variability next time. As Eric said, everybody did well with Rockwell and Cisco devices, pretty much. Yeah. Interestingly, a few things that we did expect to be identified, at least nobody in their submittal mentioned it. Pi servers, flow computers, terminal automation systems that were definitely in the stream.
Yeah.
But so it appears, one kind of takeaway is that it appears that all these tools are generally pretty good at identifying the major automation suppliers. But if you get away from maybe the top 3 or 4 automation suppliers and into more of the field devices, it seems to fall off a bit.
Yeah. And drives weren't particularly well, you know, drive controllers weren't well identified and stuff like that.
Right.
You know.
So that second and fourth bullet are really interesting, because that wasn't my expectation. I know when you guys were showing me the asset list, one of the things I liked is it was a very rich asset list.
Yeah.
You know, and those are just some of the things that weren't found. There's just a variety of smaller components that are quite typical for a midstream oil and gas.
Very typical, right.
We didn't give the contestants a lot of information, but we did say it's a midstream oil and gas. So my expectation was that they would say, well, these are the types of things that are going to be in midstream oil and gas, and we should be looking for these types of things. But it might be a product maturity issue, it might be a sector issue, but it's something I think if you're a customer, you really have to look at. And it'd be curious, one of the things maybe we should do is look and see if some of the things that were missed were in the list of supported protocols for any of the contestants. Because I'd be curious, you know, why wasn't that seen? I mean, obviously, if you have not built in that intelligence into your product, you're not going to see it. But was it there and just missed? The other thing that you had in one of the columns is you said no one found the hardware version, right?
That's correct, I think.
Yeah.
Did anyone give you any process data? And did anyone say, like, this PLC is doing this at the terminal? Or did anyone say this is a terminal and this is a pipeline pumping station?
I wouldn't expect that either. I don't see how
that would have been tough.
How you could ever get that out of a PCAP.
We did get things like trend lines from data.
Yeah.
You know, people did give us
Somebody
that.
did trend some of the Modbus data because there was some regular Modbus traffic, so they provided us a trend of that point.
Well, and I could see that would be the difference maybe between automation and the skill of the asset.
Yeah.
And we were trying to test the product.
Yes.
And it's very possible that data might be in the system. It would just take the analyst a while as he's mapping out to say, okay, I'm seeing all these things here. What is it?
And I think possibly more, you know, our samples were short. I would have loved to have had a week's worth of traffic to play back, but hey, S4's not that long and we didn't have that access. You know, because I suspect that things leak out over time onto the network.
Okay.
To your earlier point, though, one of the things was the asset owner already knows the functionality of the PLC, so they don't need a tool to tell them that.
Yeah.
But just finding and discovering and cataloging these devices, that's something that's very difficult for asset owners to keep up with. So.
I think there's one more slide.
Now, do we know? Go ahead and go to the next slide. We'll finish that up. Go ahead. And then.
Yeah, this is one of the things that surprised us. The tools were very good at finding clear text passwords, but everybody found different ones. I was kind of surprised at that. I think everybody found some clear text passwords, but
we had 3 or 4 that we knew were in there. They were scrubbed, but we knew they were in there.
Yeah, and but nobody found them all. So that sort of, And how that worked, I don't know. I had expected everybody to find them all.
That was it?
I think that's it.
Oh, okay.
That's it. I think there's one last slide. Yeah.
Oh, this is going to be exciting. So the detection results will be Thursday, and we will crown a winner. So we'll add up the scores from round 1 and round 2, and there will be a winner, and we'll bring the winner on stage, and they can tell us what they liked and didn't like about the competition, because it clearly was a first try, and people volunteering their time, we really appreciate it. Now, one thing we talked about when we were collecting this data, did we launch any special tools to generate the data? For example, something to do a scan to collect a bunch of information from Rockwell PLCs or anything of that nature that would have allowed them to get more?
Generally, no, but in some cases, because most of this was basically a snapshot in time of real operations. In some cases, we did exercise, for example, RS logics. You open that up and click around, that will start to generate some additional traffic. So
right.
Part of that was, some of that was done to try to make sure that there was at least some of that traffic in there.
Okay.
Yeah. And some of them definitely, I think you could have sampled for a year and not seen much asset information. Because there's just nothing out there generating.
Now, why do you think they didn't pick up, with the exception of Nozomi, why didn't they pick up the SCADA system? I mean, they identified them as servers, right? So they saw the asset, they saw it was communicating.
Windows boxes, yeah.
But was that server going out and querying a lot of different PLCs?
Those servers were chewing up a lot of bandwidth. Yeah. So I think I was a little surprised that everybody didn't find the telvent.
Okay.
Yeah. And I don't know. You'll have to ask them why they missed the telvent.
Yeah, I mean, one of the takeaways for those of you in the audience is this gives you a good set of questions, and you probably have your own questions from this data to ask the contestants, when you see them around, or if they're a sponsor in their cabana, and find out what you'd like. And they may tell us, hey, we saw that, here's an example of where we saw it, because again, we gave them a score sheet that had some limitations, right? They had columns to fill in, and there may be more things that just didn't fit in the score sheet.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what you covered, were there any other extras that were found that weren't in the score sheet besides you said you found a SYN flood, or somebody said they found a SYN flood, anything else?
We tried to highlight the major additional findings in those few slides.
Yeah, those are the things that really caught our attention.
So we should congratulate Claroty, right? Because they won round 1.
It was close, but yep.
It was very close. Yep. And I'd probably give a call out to Nozomi for picking off as many bonus points as they did.
Yeah, it sounds like Nozomi got fewer points, stronger detail on the things that they did. So less total asset, or less cells in the answer sheet filled in, but more detail in the ones they filled.
Yes.
And Security Matters was right up there with the 20 as well.
Yeah, right.
So you're seeing kind of a cluster, and I think the other thing that this may be a good place to close on is this really is telling you about the capability of this product line, or this product category, what it can and can't do for an asset owner in a fairly difficult environment, right? Here, connect up this sensor in 15 places, collect a couple hours, and tell me everything I have. That's about as tough as it gets.
Yep.
Yeah, it's much worse than it would be in real life. I mean, hopefully your client would tell you that they have telvent out there, and not just blindside you on it.
But I do think a lot of clients because I know some vendor or some asset owners that have done this, do bake-offs, and
Yes.
And they don't provide a lot of information. They say go in blind and do this thing.
I would also say that sometimes the asset owners sort of forget about things, not intentionally, and it's really, they literally are not aware that an OEM had put something in there, so sometimes you just have to get, the asset discovery has to discover it because the vendor forgot about it, or the owner forgot about it.
So just one other thing before phase 2, the Contestants, obviously, they now have a set of PCAPs, and some of their people might be analyzing these further to understand the system. You know, more of a test of the analysts and the tool over the next day. They are allowed to do that, and then they'll come to the detection challenge with that knowledge on Thursday morning. Maybe we can just finish up, and the answer can be nothing, but is there anything else that you learned or you want to tell the crowd about what you saw or think about the products after phase one?
Certainly, as I said at the beginning, one of my objectives was to see what kind of results can you get providing one of these tools with a PCAP to help take out some of the legwork of what we do on projects. So we correlate information from a lot of different sources to come up with an asset list, and so the more data you could feed these tools, possibly the more refined they could get. For example, we typically look at config files and log files and information about the Windows systems, and that gives a bigger, a more detailed picture. Right now, I'm only aware of one tool that didn't compete in the challenge that brings in additional information like that. But the more sources you can give it, the better it should be able to do.
Okay.
Yeah, I would echo that. I'm seeing in the IT world tools that are not just looking at the network, but they're looking at all sorts of different information sources by, and you know, you get a much fuller view of what you get, and I think that's what we need.
Okay. Well, I really want to thank, you know, these gentlemen, Ron Brash. They had some people on their teams that also helped. I know John's been pulling his people off projects as we got closer and closer. They've really put in a lot of work to make this happen, and also I just want to thank all the contestants for, you know, stepping up in a situation that could have been difficult for them, but they all performed quite well, especially the three that focus on this asset identification. So please give them all a round of applause and stay tuned for more. Thanks, guys.